So today we're going to talk about strategies to attract local real estate investors. Dan Williams is presenting with me. He didn't get on the marquee, so he's one other, which is an inside joke that we'll talk about a little bit later. So first off, just real quick gauge your level of experience with working with investors. How many of you work with real estate investors? Would you say consistently? Is it a regular part of your business? Those of you have your hands up? Okay. How many of you kind of have some fear around working with real estate investors? Nobody? Good. Okay. How many of you are real estate investors? Okay, about half the room. All right. So one of my big passions about this niche and working with this group of people is that there's a big problem with retirement in America, and it's that most of the products that are sold to Americans benefit Wall Street more than they benefit Main Street. And so most Americans, most of my clients, when I sit down with them, they don't really know what their retirement income is going to be. They may have a CPA, but they're not doing any tax planning. They're just doing compliance. They may have a financial advisor or a 401k, but they don't really understand how that lump sum of money is going to translate into income. And so my passion is helping them diversify out of Wall Street into a product we all understand, right? We all own a home, and that can create an alternative stream of income, and that can create a legacy. So here's an example of what we're going to talk about today. Aaron's financial advisor referred him to me to advise me on to have me advise him on his rental property. We took Aaron's spendable cash flow from $1,900 a month on that rental property to over $5,200 a month, nearly tripling his cash flow and kicking off a conversation with his financial advisor about retiring early. So we'll dive into his case study a little bit. Now, 24 years ago, I purchased my first rental property. It's actually pictured there. It was a triplex in Anaheim, California. And no, I don't still have it. I wish I had kept it. Stupid decision. I thought I was wealthy. Dan and I together in our time working together, partnering, collaborating, sharing staff and systems, have worked with 195 investors, mostly to help them buy single-family homes. And this slide is why I referred to Dan as one more. This is our book on Amazon. It lists me as the author, and if you see, it says, and one more. It was a top new release in the mortgage category when we put it out earlier this year. We're also fund managers. We raised a little over $1 million. We're buying property in the Midwest. This is an example of the property value and the rents we're getting. So Tom Wheelwright is the author of a really great book on tax. It's actually very easy to understand, and he's Robert Kiyosaki's CPA, if you know, the Rich Dad, Poor Dad author. He was paid to speak at a massive real estate event. It's called Built How. My coach, Debbie DeGroat, is one of the founders of that event, and because of that coaching relationship, my wife and I got to spend some time with Tom.
And I don't know if you know who Remy Adelike is, retired Navy SEAL, Special Forces TV show, been in the movie Ambulance and Plane. Remy's a friend of mine. I've been blessed to work with a lot of Navy SEALs, special operators, and I did a poor job. I didn't hold up his book, which is Transformed, and really that's been our epiphany of how we're transforming our clients' lives, and we'll get into a case study about it, but definitely read Remy's book if you get a chance.
So I asked Aaron, my client, whose numbers I gave earlier, for a testimonial via text, and the gist of what he wrote is that my guidance is making him a lot of money, right? Obviously going from $1,900 a month to $5,200 a month kind of says that, but let's make a deal here. I'm going to go through this quickly. This is not a commercial. It's just pure content of the things we've learned, kind of how we approach real estate investors. Love for you to take some notes, try to get something useful out of it, actionable out of it. At the end, I will make an offer with your permission, but in between here and there, it's just content. Obstacles that get in the way, that time can be the biggest challenge, learning to deal with real estate investors, learning to prospect your database we're primarily going to talk about a way to get real estate investors to list their property and reposition it into other markets. There may be confusion for you on how to do that. There may even be some fear if you're not strong, really comfortable talking with investors. So we'll cover some of those things today. But if I had a time machine and you hopped into it and brought you to the point where you've mastered some of the skills that we're going to cover today, and you had the ability to generate consistent investor clients in your book of business, my question is, what will that do for your business, right? For the business of your real estate agents. Dan and I have a different approach there on that. Like, I take the listings here in Southern California because I got a broker's license and I have a broker associate. Dan brings them to his real estate agent partners. So we have different strategies in how we handle that. But imagine what that'll do for your business if you're able to do that consistently. So we're going to talk 3 core concepts, case study, and then the conversational framework, the way we have it. So the core concepts that we cover are rent to price ratio, there's a regional variation, there's legal liabilities that vary between states, and then the fact that cash flow is king. So rent to price ratio, that's really just monthly rent divided by the property value. That's really the first foundational concept to grasp, and that's that, $1 million home here in San Diego, that's pretty much the median home price, is going to rent for about $4,000 a month. That's about 40 basis points. There's regional variation, which is the second concept that we talk about with our investors, and that's that different states have different rent to price ratios. This provides an opportunity to have a regional arbitrage. Then there's legal liability. It varies between states. Alan Enoch, who's a real estate attorney here in San Diego, mentioned to me recently, he didn't tell me what the infraction was, but he said the city of Chula Vista has a $1,000 per day fine to an owner of a rental property. So if the owner violates that, they find out that it's been in place for 45 days or 90 days, that's a $45,000, $90,000 fine. And a lot of it, not only is the state moving this way, the state of California with some of their directives and rent controls on the ballot, et cetera, but many of the municipalities are doubling down on stupid and making it worse. That's a technical term there, by the way. So cash flow is king, and a lot of investors here, I hear, yeah, but you don't get appreciation in other markets. That's factually not true. You do get appreciation in other markets. But appreciation is like raising pigs. You can't eat the bacon without slaughtering the pig. You have to sell the investment in order to be able to spend or compound that equity. Cash flow does not have that problem because you receive it consistently. All right? So an investment that produces cash flow is like a hen. It lays eggs consistently. All right? So those are the 4 concepts that we discuss with our clients. And I often get pushback on cash flow being better, but those 4 issues are the way to address that. I'm not going to dive deep into them. If you want to read our book, I go into those there pretty deeply. But just suffice it to say, cash flow is king, right? So moving from the core concepts to a case study, the client I mentioned at the beginning, he estimated his home value was worth $1.4 million. His Edward Jones advisor had sent him to me because the tenant had just moved out, and he was undecided about whether he wanted to get another tenant or not, and he had an offer from a tenant for $5,000 a month for the house. The property had significant deferred maintenance, like a lot of deferred maintenance. So the question was, what should he do with the home, right? So his goal was to maximize the income potential of that rental property with the hope that maybe in 5 to 10 years, he could position himself to buy his dream home. So our discussion, I focused on what rent-to-price ratio was, that different states have different ratios, and that for him, with his goals, cash flow's king. So he sold that one house. We listed it. It was in Bonita, California. We sold it for $1.5 million. He had a $200,000 roughly tax savings because we did a 1031 exchange. Does anybody not know what a 1031 exchange is? Good, because the industry we're in, we all want to know, right? So he executed that process. We assisted him with it. And then he purchased 4 new construction homes from a build-to-rent partner that we have in the Memphis market, Memphis metro area. And he went from massive deferred maintenance to brand new construction where there is no deferred maintenance. They're professionally managed. These are 2 of the homes. These are the other 2. The end result was that he had a 178% increase in his cash flow because he went to $88.30 a month in rent. And that was guaranteed by the builder because in this market right now, one of their incentives to investors to buy, with rates having been as high as they are, is that they're guaranteeing rent from day one. So even if it takes them 2 months to get a tenant, they gave the rent. His spendable cash flow was $52.83 per month. That's after all inputs. That's after management. That's after set-asides for vacancy, maintenance. That's truly spendable cash flow. If you looked at, that's an increase of $33.83 over what we were estimating his spendable cash flow would have been on the $5,000 a month in rent that he was offered on the home in Bonita. Additionally, he has 4 tenants instead of just 1. And a future vacancy then is only 25%, whereas with 1 house, you lose your tenant, you have 100% vacancy, right? So if we assume that he invests the cash flow with his Edward Jones advisor, and I just picked for this purposes a 9% rate of return, over 10 years, that cash flow will be an extra $650,000 that he can use when he buys that dream home, when he executes on that goal. So would you say that's life-changing? Right? Those are not small. So we're not talking about this with our investors about nibbling at the margin. Let's make small changes, a little 10% more. We're talking about massive changes. So Dan's going to go over the conversation.
So in dealing with, I work with a lot of financial advisors and obviously investors, and I really wanted to hone in on questions that would make a difference in their thinking and how our conversation went. So I really arrived at 3 questions because financial advisors do not touch or
You're going to get a mic.
or barely touch rental real estate. Financial advisor has a client that has 1 single family home, maybe it's their first home and they moved out. Financial advisor barely even talks about it. They don't even touch it, which is insanity, but that's a whole nother discussion. So I wanted to find a way to really get to them. And then I realized, well, this also works for my database. So the first question I asked them, very open-ended question, how is your rental property performing? How is it performing financially? Very open-ended question. I absolutely beg you to ask everybody you've done business with that question. And whether it's good, bad, indifferent, it leads to question 2, which is what metric are you using to support your answer? 9 times out of 10, what do we hear? It's cash flowing. Okay, great. What does that even mean? That's not a financial metric. You've got an investment property, you're looking to make a rate of return. Rate of return is a financial metric. So this typically stumps people, which is a great thing for us because we can step in and help them get clarity on what is this returning. We get into conversations about rent ratio. It always translates into the stuff they're dealing with regulatory-wise, legal-wise, the laws. So this is a key one. If you don't know financial metrics, cap rate, internal rate of return, cash-on-cash return, study those. Take you, a couple hours to really know them well. But this is something you want to ask every investor you've worked with because they bought it to make money and they don't know what they're doing as far as what the rate of return is.
One of the most common answers is, well, the rent covers my mortgage. And my response to that is then you're losing money, right? Because rent not received negatively compounds. You think about that roof repair. If it's $20,000 this year to do that roof, an investor needs to set aside $1,000 a year at a 6% rate of return for 20 years, and he'll have $36,000 because that's what that roof is going to cost at 3% inflation in 20 years, right? So if they don't set aside that $1,000 a year, then in 20 years when they need to pay for that $36,000 roof and they finance it, it's going to cost them $3,000 a year. So rent not received, the positive cash flow not received, negatively compound.
Which leads into the final question that I ask, what's more important to you, appreciation or cash flow? And what does every real estate investor say? Cash flow. But they always lean back on, well, I own this home because it's appreciating so quickly. So you've got to help them get clarity on those 2 issues. And as we know and as we've shared, cash flow rules. You can outrun a lot of mistakes they taught us in business school with more revenue. And so cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. So those 3 questions has really transformed my conversations with financial advisors and my clients. And right now we've got $2.5 million of listings, just going back to a handful of my clients and having an in-depth conversation about this. And it's pretty cool calling my real estate partners and saying, hey, I've got a $1.8 million listing for you.
That's huge. I have 2 listings that have been coming on the MLS in October. They're doing some repairs to them, and it came from this conversation. Also, a client was referred by their Edward Jones advisor. I've done real estate when it came up. Like I'm a mortgage guy, and if I had a buyer I'd offer if they didn't have an agent, so that's how I did my listing, or my transactions. I typically did maybe 4 a year. And for the first time with this method, like I've got a pipeline in the next year. We're easily going to do a dozen transactions next year, and they'll probably all be listing just based on this. Then there's the opportunity for down leg referrals, right? If you ever referred a client to a real estate agent out of state, pretty common in that industry to get 25% of that. So there are other opportunities there that this unfolds.
And then I get into the story. They'll ask, or they'll give me their feedback, they'll give me their answers, and then I'll just say, let me tell you a story. And we can talk about clients that we've helped, actual case studies. We can talk about our syndicate, that Todd shared earlier. What, $1.4 million worth of real estate in Michigan, earning $17,400 in rent for $1.4 million. And so the lesson that hits home is there's opportunity elsewhere, and really for the first time, we can answer the question, what's next? And that's been a difference maker.
Could you repeat what the rent was on the 1.4 million?
$17,460 approximately.
Yeah. So at 14 homes, we paid an average of $104,000. We bought them in cash. First 7 that we appraised, they appraised at 13% of what we paid. And it's just a very high rent market.
Well, I'm from Michigan. What part of Michigan are you talking about?
Macomb County, so north of 8 Mile. I don't want to be in Detroit. I don't want to be in Wayne County.
I grew up in Macomb County.
Yeah.
Nice.
So,
All right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's been
Areas that are gentrifying.
It's been a wonderful experience, but just being able to ask those questions and be able to share what's next has just changed the dynamics on my whole database.
Yeah. So the story.
Oh.
Tell the story. I'll tell the story.
No, well, you go ahead. Let me go then. So I'll start sharing Todd's journey in finding Macomb County. I was born in Toledo, by the way. And Todd's journey of finding Macomb County, explaining the rent to price ratio. And I really walk through how the regions are different. That's been the biggest eye opener for me. I mean, I've been doing this almost 20 years and I couldn't figure that out for the first 18, how different marketplaces were. It's shockingly how different. And then just walking them through that it's possible. I mean, it's such an easy story for people to understand. I own this home and I get X for rent. If you owned 4 in Memphis, you would get Y for rent. It's so simple to understand, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. So the story, the way I tell it's changed over the years. It's gotten a lot simpler because I've got case studies. I've got examples. My CPA is another example that I didn't bring up here as a case study. We sold his downtown condo earlier this year for $660,000. He was losing $500 a month. Now this is a CPA, a very smart man. But he had an investment that when he moved out a decade before, he expected rents to rise and eventually get a positive cash flow. How many of our clients say that stuff to us, right? Common. Well, the problem is the HOA kept bumping up, and so the time we sold it, his HOA was $830 a month. And they don't have a valet or any of the other services. So it didn't cash flow. Rents had just not kept up. So he had a negative $500 a month. We sold that condo, and unlike Aaron's story, who cash flow is king, my CPA is also Aaron, so Aaron with 1A, his goal was 10-year return, total return. So we focused on, instead of buying 2 properties from this builder, he bought 3. I did a 30-year fixed Fannie Mae on one, and then I did 2 40-year fixed interest only where we bought the rate down to the same rate he was at with the Fannie, so there was no rate delta. But he has 10 years of interest only, and because we were squeezing in he didn't want to bring in any money out of pocket, we didn't do any impounds. So he was able to execute on buying 3 properties without the impounds, and he's got a small positive cash flow after all set aside, maybe $100, $150 a month. So he was happy with that because he went from a negative where he had to feed the alligator, which is always dangerous, to having a positive, and he's got 3 homes now. $946,000 was the total purchase price of those 3 homes. I forget the rent, but significantly more rent as well, right? So it's easy to tell those stories because I've got them now. My original version of the story was just looking around at the market. I was on deployment in 2019, and I was looking at Zillow data because in between periods of chaos, you have all this period of quiet where you have plenty of time to do stupid stuff. And so I was looking at Zillow data, and I just noticed how different the median rent was per market in relation to the median home price. And when I came back from deployment, as it would have, just sort of by chance, this builder approached me. Turned out I knew the founder's son. I didn't know what his dad had done, but he'd started this company and they were building build to rent in that market. So for me, it was immediate, like, I've got to get this word out to my clients because it answers the mail. You know, if you buy a 70-year-old home, I don't care how good you inspect it, right? There's stuff in the walls that you don't know about. Anybody experience that? Right? Solid, this is a great house. And then one of them, we had a tremendous rain. It was on a hillside and the foundation cracked because the weight of the chimney, the soil had gotten so soft from this saturation. They could have predicted that with an inspection, right? But so I saw, you know, the new construction and the way this particular builder was doing it as a great opportunity to share with my clients. And it had the added benefit that our market is 40 basis points in rent as a percentage of the value. That market is like 70 basis points, or was at the time. It's more like 65 now. So it's significantly more rent as a percentage of the property value. So you sell $1 million house, you might buy 3 homes there, and you're going to get 50%, or, you know, depending on the market you're in, you might get double the rent, triple the rent. And so that's really the story, is there's this opportunity of getting a regional arbitrage, as well as getting out of the insanity that is California.
Yeah, and you know, on the 1031 side, I mean, we work with such an expert here locally that we have full confidence that he's going to educate our client and really help them understand it. And from our side, doing the mortgage, if you haven't done one with a 1031, it's not difficult, not a whole lot different.
Yeah, so that's the conversational framework that we use to kick it off with our clients, is how is your rental property performing? What metric are you using to support that, you know, feeling about it? And, you know, which is more important, the appreciation or cash flow? And that opens the door for that story to talk about the opportunity about repositioning their rental property, getting the listing or referring the listing, and then getting the down leg referral and the loans. Yeah?
How did you get the builder to guarantee rent?
It's just what they're offering, this particular builder. You know, as rates spiked, it happened pretty quickly. They want to keep their cap rates, you know, around 6%. And do I need to, does anybody need an explanation of cap rate? Okay. So they want to keep it there, so they're minimizing the vacancy by guaranteeing rent for the first couple months. They own the management company too. They started out without managing them themselves, and they just found that was problematic, so they started their own internal management company so they can do some of those things.
It's a big operation where they manage like 900
Fourth
doors.
largest builder in Memphis right now.
Yeah.
There was a project I heard in Texas a couple years ago, they were doing that too, because they wanted outside money coming in, and they had, Texas is such a big rental market right outside Houston, that they were guaranteeing the same thing from day one.
It wouldn't surprise me if all the build-to-rent companies are doing it. REI
Yeah.
Nation, JB, whatever in Jacksonville. It wouldn't surprise me if they all are.
How would you locate those particular builders? Is that just by happenstance or just by calling or?
I mean, yeah, you can do an internet search for build to rent, and but I just named a couple. REI Nation. I'm not a big fan of the one out of Jacksonville. JB.
I don't remember.
Out of Jacksonville, but yeah, there's opportunities with the new construction. Absolutely. Or you can partner with us, I guess. So those are the core concepts. We reviewed the case study, the conversational framework. So, you know, my question for you, knowing what you now know, can you see yourself growing your production by working with more real estate investors?
Sure.
You know, are you happy you came? Was this worth the time? Okay, would you say, I guess I'm repeating myself. Would you say your time was well spent? Here we go. Read your slides, Todd, read your slides. Okay, so the offer is, you know, Dan and I are both fairly busy now we're about to launch a second investment fund. But we thought it would be helpful to some individuals, limited number, 3 or 4, coaching on this. If you're interested in that, if you're interested in talking about it, you know, we'll talk about the criteria. You can talk to us after the class, or if you just have questions on it, those are our emails, you can email us. If you're interested in our book, that's the QR code on Amazon. The feedback from clients has been that it's very readable. It's only about 85 pages, so it's kind of a one-night book. We used, if you're over David Kakish's thing, we used Midjourney, the ChatGPT drawing thing to make all the sketches in the book. So it's been an interesting process creating that and editing it. And it's a great way to kick off the conversation if you can get a client to read the book. It's my biggest sales tool right now, right? Very useful.
What is your process for entering new markets? Realizing it must have been different when you first started versus now?
Yeah, every market has, the question was, what is my process for entering new markets, in case everybody didn't hear it. Every market has A, B, and C neighborhoods, you know. The A neighborhoods would be the La Joillas or the higher end, new construction usually. Those are not going to cash flow. You know, you may get superior appreciation. Generally, with new construction homes, you get superior appreciation. Your C markets are the neighborhoods you probably don't want to be invested in. Higher crime, school districts that maybe aren't performing well, issues. It's kind of neighborhood you drive through and you go, this is a little bit of a rough neighborhood. Not necessarily a great investment there. On paper, they look fantastic. Sometimes you hear the 2% rule, like you can get 2% of the property value in rent. You're never going to actually get that. It's an illusion. Like on paper, the rent maybe, it's a Detroit, it's a $45,000 house, and you can get $900 a month in rent. It's 2%, right? But you're never going to cash flow on it. Like Detroit has this thing, we've experienced it already, with a vacant house. Somebody will steal your furnace and your water heater. And it just puzzles me. If you're that industrious of a thief, just go straight, man. Like, come on. So those neighborhoods, you're not going to cash flow. So the sweet spots are the B neighborhoods. So I look for gentrification. I looked like, when I was looking at neighborhoods in Michigan, I was touring houses, and on the block I was on, it was all 2-bedroom, 1-bath homes, these older homes that had been built in the 50s. And a couple houses down were these 2-story, 5-bedroom, 3-bath. I asked my realtor, I said, can you look those up? And the builder had bought a 2-bedroom, scraped the lot, and put up a 5-bedroom, 3-bath. That's a good neighborhood to invest in, right? Because if a builder's making money taking those old homes and expanding them for families so they can, who wants to share a bathroom with their kid, honestly, right? You get a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house, like how that was ever a thing, I don't know. My dad was raised that way. So if they can make money there in that, gentrifying the neighborhood, and there's other criteria, like looking at the city, how well is the city run, what's the city reputation? Like, since we're talking about Michigan, I would never invest in Pontiac or Detroit, just some of the issues with those cities. So there's definitely research there. And then I look at my clients, if I'm giving that advice, and is this somebody that's willing to spend the time and study? Do they have the capacity for it? What's their risk tolerance? You know this about your clients. Like, when they go through the loan estimate of the CD, are they freaking out over every line? They're probably not somebody to send into older homes, right? Have them advise them to invest in new construction that's going to go better for them.
Yeah, and the key is setting up the people we care about, our clients, for success, right? That's what we want to do. And we are not sending one-off investors to Detroit. We got our hands full with that business. And so I wouldn't have someone go one-off there.
Yeah.
With coaching, is it more like a partnership where we can bring in clients, or is it more like you teach us what we need to do on our own?
No, we thought 3 months, 2 recorded Zoom calls, 6 sessions, specific content, but we're only going to do that for 3 or 4 people, and we're not doing it for free. So
Yeah, we just, with the new fund starting, there's a lot on the
next
table.
month,
We have limited bandwidth, so.
yeah.
Like, would you guys do a partnership? Like, you had clients that wanted to do that, and you guys have a plan for it or something, or the property?
For the right person, right? We have a lot of people in C2, right? And there's a lot of people in C2 I would not partner with, right? There's a lot I would. So yes, we can have a conversation about that. Absolutely. We've got not only practiced at this conversation, we've got some confidence around it. It probably shows, right? So be happy to help in that way and talk about a commission split for the right person. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
I know you touched on cash flow and appreciation. Do you guys also throw in there tax benefit? Because as you know, when you invest in real estate, there's a huge tax benefit.
Okay, so the question, good. So the question was, we talked about appreciation and cash flow. Do we also touch on tax benefits? I focused on the 2 things I focused on in this presentation for a reason. There's only 2 ways that rental property create wealth. Tax benefits is not one of them. Tax benefits reduces expenses, right? Amortization does not create wealth. That's a transfer of wealth. You already received the rent. You received that wealth, and you're taking some of it, and if you have a choice, if you've got an interest-only loan and you're amortizing that loan, you're taking that wealth you already had in your checking account and making it illiquid. Now, there's reasons to do that. It's a great storage of wealth, but it doesn't create wealth. Appreciation and cash flow, this positive spendable cash flow after all set-asides, after all expenses, those are the only two ways that rental property create wealth. So that's why we focused on those. And honestly, as passionate as I am about the tax stuff, because I can talk somebody's ear off about it, we lose a lot of investors with that. They're just not that interested, right? So I find it's better to save that conversation for later, once they're experiencing the cash flow, because now they got a problem, a higher tax bill. And I can advise them on that, whether it's accelerated depreciation or hey, it's time to buy another property, so you get additional depreciation. There's ways to handle that, yeah.
And I found
Fair question.
about 1 out of 10 investors that I've worked with want to go deep on taxes. It's just not something that is on 90% of the people's minds to really get in depth. Inside of our fund, we've got a couple different shares that address heavy depreciation versus heavy income type shares. But it's important. It's just not a heavily discussed.
Yeah. Yes. Behind you. Yeah. He raised his hand first. Yeah. Yeah. Single family versus multifamily. So when you get over, especially over the 8 units, because we do have some lenders that'll do that weird 5 to 8 unit, and they'll treat it like it's a 1 to 4. But when you get over 8, you're in commercial, and that financing is very, very different. Have you ever looked at those? Like 5-year ARM with a 5-year lockout. You got 6 months to refinance, and then it's an adjustable rate mortgage, and maybe a balloon payment. Like the financing is very, very different. DSCR in our space, a single family, came from that. But everybody understands single family, right? They own their own home. So investing in a single family is a lot easier to understand. It's also a lot easier to get out of if you have trouble, right? If you have a 10-unit apartment building and you need to raise cash, can you sell one apartment? The answer is no, right? But you can sell a single family, right? It's also easier to get a loan against in a lot of cases. So we've chosen to focus on single family in our own investing, as well as advising our clients that way. Yeah. Did I answer your question? Depends on the market. Some markets, they're just not communities where there are 2 to 4 units. So it depends. In theory, the rent per door in a 4-unit building is going to be better than the rent per door in 4 single-family houses. But as Yogi Berra famously said, the difference between theory and practice is there's no difference, but in practice there is, right? So in front of you, your question, ma'am?
I just have a question. So, like, if you're starting to do this, where are you going to find your money?
So we went back to our own database. I mean, do you have clients that own rental property right now?
I don't. Yeah, I mean, some do.
Okay. Do you have financial advisors or real estate agents that have clients that have rental property? Right? So it's getting good at that conversation. Bigger Pockets has a ton of resources to read up on this stuff. I just find investors, like in this market, it's really easy to get a listing from an investor. It's not so easy to get a listing from a homeowner, right? Because they got a 3%, or in my case, because I spent so much time in the military, a lot of my clients are VA, and they've got a 2.25% mortgage. They don't want to give that up. They'd rather take out a second and add on, or just make do, right? Build bunk beds for the kids,
I would add too, if you're calling friends, family members, whomever, just ask if they own a rental property or they know someone who does. Because I've been alerted to there's amazing opportunities in that space.
Yeah.
I was curious because, you can go to public records, you can go to the title company, you can find, very easy to find them on owners, there's a ton of VA, there's a lot of EA people that live out of state that still have VA loans. I'm just wondering if you didn't do anything with public records.
Well, sure. I mean, you can pull a list, and we're about to experiment with it, but our core of our business is sphere of influence for both of us. We were in the buy referral only coaching program for 5 years. That's how we met. And it's just so easy to talk to people we already know. And you find what you look for, right? So if I'm talking to my friends, my past clients, about do you have any friends that own a rental property in Southern California? If I have enough people I ask, they're going to say yes, right? So it's out there if you just stay in touch with your database. I think we're running out of time, but you'd take one more question.
So kind of a, fun business knowledge, I guess, in my perspective. I'm from Vegas. The vast majority of my clients are VA. Young folks, right, coming through and whatnot, different bases. And a lot of them are learning to utilize their VA benefits by home here, they move and so on and so forth. Right? And a lot of times they always ask, well, you know, if I rent this house out, you know, I may only make a couple of $100 a month, or maybe even $100. My advice to them, I've always told them, I said, look, don't think about that right now. You've got plenty of time for that. Worry about the appreciation piece. And listening to what you said over here, kind of, should I change my advice when I'm telling these people?
Possibly.
Yeah,
Possibly.
Run the numbers.
All right.
Evaluate different markets. Say, hey, this is what you're experiencing right now. If you went to Memphis or wherever, this is what you would experience there. Just run the numbers.
Yeah, they could depart the residence and rent it, or they could sell the residence and take that equity and buy a rental, right? Because they're using their VA benefit again. I mean, that's your story's my buddy Steve. Like he bought serial of houses. He's now got 4 rentals as a result of using that strategy.
I love the concept.
Yeah. All right. All right, we're hogging up Tane's time.
We're being played off. And
Yeah.